All right. Welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today I'm excited to have Chipper Whatcott on. We're going to be talking about bootstrapping a startup and really kind of diving into how do you think about going to market or getting users, acquiring customers for a startup, especially a software startup, when you don't have huge money backing you. And so super excited to have you on to talk about that, Chipper.
Excited to be here. Thank you for bringing me on, Joseph.
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this to you before, but I usually don't like starting episodes out by asking people about their company and diving into that. Usually that's kind of down the road. But since we're talking about startups and bootstrapping a startup, I'd love to hear just super high level about Mallow and what you're doing.
Sure. So Mallow is a software platform. It's one place where you can manage your contracts and your payments with your clients. So if you can imagine, if DocuSign and Stripe had a baby, that baby would be named Mallow. That's essentially what it is.
Love it. Cool. We'll dive a little bit more into kind of what you're solving here in a second. But is this your first venture?
It's not. No. I've had a handful of others, some in sort of blue collar services, and one other tech startup, another one in e-commerce. I've tried a whole bunch of different things, but this is my second consecutive software startup.
Awesome. Yeah. So one thing that I find super interesting about startups in general is just how do you find product market fit, and specifically, like, how did you land on the idea of Stripe meets DocuSign? Like, where was the need that you were like, man, this is something that we really need to solve?
That's a good question. I can tell you how not to find product market fit. Our journey just sort of led us to what we are building now, and we are finding that product market fit faster now than we ever have before. But it started off on more of a rough note. So the first software company that I had started was called Whelm. It was sort of one place where you could manage all of your freelance work. So it had invoicing, and it had some contracts, and it had client feedback studio, and it had project management and all these different tools that you would need as a freelancer. Really, we built it the way that we did because it was scratching my own itch. I had been doing some freelance work for years. And so, I was sort of building a platform that I thought I would really like. And what we found was there were people who resonated with it. We had over 1,000 users at one point who
Oh, wow.
signed up to use it, but very few of them were willing to pay for it. And by very few, I mean literally there was like a few who were willing to pay for it. Everyone else was on the free tier, and so I tell that story to say that is not the right way to find product market fit. I built something that I would really like, and then I just kind of hoped that other people would be willing to pay for it. And I should have been smarter about that. I should have recognized that I'm a freelancer. I don't want to pay anybody for anything because freelance work is just that way. You don't
Yeah.
know if you're going to have another contract come through. Your margins are your own work, right? So you're paying for your own labor, and you don't really want to pay for anything else. So that was a bad way to try to find product market fit. I think we were getting closer toward the end of it, but we really never hit our stride. I don't think we would ever say that we found PMF. However, as we were building that business, we had companies approach us, marketing agencies specifically, and they said, hey, can you build an agency tier onto Whelm? We like this idea, we like this concept of what you're building, but we want an agency tier for this. And really, it was built specifically for freelancers. They would have had a terrible experience if they had tried to use it. And so we decided, well, I don't know if we can. At this point, a year and a half into the business, I brought on a co-founder. His name is Ben. And me and Ben were talking about it, and we're like, we don't think this is going to do well for agencies. They kind of need their own vision, their own product. They're totally different markets, and we're not going to be able to service both of them well. And so we decided to pivot internally, and we sold off Whelm and we started building Mallow. And so Mallow came about organically. It was this idea of maybe we need to go upstream to find companies who are willing to pay us for the thing we're building. And then we had companies coming to us asking for it. And so it made sense to pursue that direction. However, still before building it, we didn't touch a single line of code before we had made about 30 different calls to different prospects. And once we nailed down 5 people who were willing to pay, then we built it.
I love what you just said, because I've actually been kind of leaning into product market fit and the importance of finding that out first. And you basically just described all of the challenges that I keep seeing, not just in the software space, but this happens with consulting and service businesses too. Like if you're an individual consultant, what ends up happening is you go, hey, there's this problem, and I used to do this particular thing in my job, and so there's probably a market for this. I'm going to start freelancing. And so you freelance, and then because you have relationships with a few people, you probably land your first couple clients. And then when you either have clients churn or you want to scale, you go, okay, I need marketing to now go push what I'm doing to more people. But the problem is you didn't have product market fit to begin with. You just had your skills, what you were able to do with your hands, which isn't product market fit. And so then what ends up happening is people build something out without validating it and do exactly what you said. Hey, there's this problem in the market. There's people who want to solve it. And you found that there was this huge problem with freelancers. They wanted to solve it. The problem was they didn't want to pay. So just because you have a solution doesn't mean that there's a good problem. And even to your point, just because you found a problem doesn't mean that you found a problem that's painful enough for people to fork over cash to solve. And those are both things that you can spend a year or more and, tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars just to find out that you didn't actually have a viable product to begin with. And, this time around, I love what you just said there, because it's something that I've really been thinking about and talking about a lot, which is how do you get somebody to pay you before you build anything? And that's true for services. It's true for software. How do you figure out whether a problem is painful enough? Well, you get somebody who's willing to commit actual money to solve it. And then you use that money to build the lowest viable version that you can to validate whether there's more people who actually want to solve that problem.
Yeah. And it's still got to be good enough that, the MVP that you build still has to be good enough that people are willing to pay for it. But yeah, it's much better to get those paying customers first. And I'll say we didn't do it fully the right way. I made probably 30 phone calls to different marketing agencies that I could at least get on the phone. We knew if we can get 5 people to say yes, we want to pay for this, then we would build it. But even then, we didn't take checks up front. We just told them, we're going to build this. Do you want it? And once we had 5, then we started building. By the time it was ready to actually go to market and we were ready to actually onboard customers, only one of those 5 was ready to pay. Eventually, we ended up getting a second one of the 5, but yeah, originally only one of the 5 actually ended up paying because we didn't take checks up front. And that's something, if that were possible, in our situation, it didn't feel like it was possible. But I think if that is possible, do that. Get paid first before you start building it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I wasn't actually thinking of going this route, but since you kind of opened this can of worms, I kind of want to ask you about maybe some ways that you could do that in software. Because in the consulting world, people don't want to do that either. It's like, oh, it's got to be this like super polished thing. But I personally have built lots of things out, both for myself, for clients, for agencies that I've worked for, where you find this problem, one person's like, absolutely, yeah, I want to buy that. You sell it to them, and then you go, let's productize this now. Let's build our ClickUp dashboard and create all the processes and get all these different things. And then nobody else buys it, or they don't buy exactly the same thing again, right? And so I've really been on this kick of saying, why do that? Like, validate that there's an actual market need with more than one person before you sell anything. And then before you actually go to market, like sell that minimum viable thing, whatever it is, and get paid for it before you build anything. Like you said, in software, that's a lot more difficult than it is if it's a service. But even with services, it's like, hey, can you do some kind of a workshop or something like that you maybe have an outline for, but you didn't create the decks or anything, and you need to be able to deliver it. But like, how can you do that? And even with these first initial clients, how can you pitch it to them in a way where you make it clear so you're not deceiving them, and you just say, hey, we're going to give you a deal, or we're going to work something out. We'll give you a lifetime deal if you commit to the paying the first year, or whatever the case would be. Like figuring out a way to get that person to commit some money, because what I found is there are a lot of problems that people are willing to say they have, and there's fewer, but still a good chunk of problems that people will say, oh yeah, I would pay for that. And maybe you could even get them to give you an idea of how much they would pay. But then to your point, when it comes to actually paying, that's the real indication that you've found the right kind of problem, when people are like, hey, here's some money, go solve it for me. And once you get a decent number of people to say, yeah, I'll actually pay you cash, now you've actually validated that there's a real market need there. But until you've gotten that cash, you haven't. So I'm just kind of curious if you can think, like if you were to start over, if there was a way that you could do that where you get people to commit up front. Like, is there anything you could have offered? And I just kind of want to brainstorm that with you. Think about it.
I think some of it depends on your price, right? What we have built it's an SMB solution, right? We're not selling this to enterprises. It's not going to cost you $10,000 a month to use Mallow. It'll cost you $100. So at that price point, there's just not a lot of people who are willing to front you $1,000, right? Because it doesn't feel like a big enough number that they are fully committed, and they don't trust that you're fully committed because it's only $1,000, right? If it were $100,000, then we're talking about a different ballgame, right? There's lawyers involved, there's a bigger process involved, and it's more of an enterprise deal. But I love this idea that you just shared of, can you give them a lifetime? If you guys buy a lifetime deal up front, it'll be, we charge $100 a month. So if you pay $1,000 up front, you'll get this for life. You will never pay us ever again. I think that's an interesting way to do it. I think paying for a waitlisted spot is an interesting concept of like,
I like that.
Even if it's something as small as $5, where it's really more like about the mental game at that point. You got them to pay you $5, and so it's much easier for them to pay you $100 after paying the $5.
Or maybe like a wait list where you get them to pay $100, but it covers their first 2 or 3 months or something when you launch, or covers the first 3 months. And that way you're like, hey, you're getting a killer deal, but you're giving some skin in the game and just telling them, we want to validate that this is a real thing. And if we decide not to build it, then we'll refund your money. But, as soon as we go to build it, then, whatever, you could let them know. I don't know, figuring something out. Because I just see this happen over and over again. I was working with a client earlier in the year who had he did exactly what you said you did with your first thing. He had a problem in his business. It was a blue collar business, and he created a solution to solve it. And it really is a need. But the problem is people don't know that they have the need. And the people who have it the most have the least understanding of why they need it. And the people who have like the money to actually pay a good amount of money to solve the problem have already solved it in a way that's not that effective. But for them to go back and get a new software to solve it, it's tough, right? So
the pain of switching is too high.
Yeah. But he already sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars into developing this software. So he is so bought in to what he's created that he is either unwilling or unable at this point to pivot at all. And so now he has to try to create marketing to convince people to buy something. And I'm like, dude, that's tough. Maybe if you had a couple $1 million, you might be able to push a solution like this into the market. But with basically like now trying to bootstrap the rest of this, like you've done for your development, when you already built this far out, that's really tough. And so unless you're willing to like actually change things about the software or the way you communicate it, I think you're going to have a hard time. And he's coming to me going, oh, this is it. It solves all these problems. It's a great solution, and I know people want it, but I can't convince any of my friends to buy it for XYZ reason. And I'm like, that is such a huge red flag. If you can't get people who who trust you and believe in you to pay you $100 a month for this thing that you built, you're not going to go out to the market and be able to sell that same solution to random strangers. And he's convinced that he'll be able to. So I'm like, well, good luck.
Time will tell, I guess.
But it's like, how can somebody in his shoes, potentially validate some of these ideas earlier? That's kind of the thing that I'm exploring right now, is how do you validate these things earlier and maybe prove yourself wrong? I think that's the part that's hard, is you have this idea and you think it's great, but we get so caught into our own idea of the solution we have, or the problem we solve, or the people we're solving it for, that I feel like a lot of times the key indicators that you're really missing the mark, we create a narrative of why those things don't matter, rather than coming up with a hypothesis and figuring out a great way to test this first, and be really hard on our own idea. How can I make this idea fail as fast as possible, so I stop investing in it in 2 or 3 months rather than a year or 2 or 3.
Yeah. I'll tell you two things that we also changed in our go-to-market strategy for Mallow that has made a world of difference. and maybe this is something that your friend can apply as well. Number one, when we launched Whelm, the first business, we wanted everything to be perfect. And it's the same thing that every tech founder does. You want to build out all the features perfectly, because if you take it to market in its imperfect state, nobody's going to want it. But if it's perfect, then everybody will want it. And so, of course, we built out 4 or 5 different features that we thought we were building out perfectly. And then once we launched them, people didn't want them, because we built them the way that we thought maybe they would want them. But when we actually took it to market, it wasn't the way that they actually wanted them. So with Mallow, we took the opposite approach, and we built one feature, just one. And we built it to work enough. Mm-hmm. And that feature was, our transaction fees are lower than you would get with Stripe or with QuickBooks or with Square or any of the other payment tools. Our transaction fees are so much lower that we'll save you money. That was the only feature that we had. So we took that to market, and that's how we got our first 3 or 4 customers. From there, then they started giving us feedback on how the product should work or what other features they needed. And we started keeping track. So I've got a running list now. This is the most requested feature. That's the next most requested. That's the next most requested. And all of these feature requests I'm noting down are coming from people who are saying, oh, I really like this idea. I'll be a customer once you have X or once you have Y. And so that's what I'm marking down. And then once we release that feature, I contact all of those people and tell them, hey, this thing is live now. And so it's, 1, we didn't try to build it all the way the first time. And then 2, we're using our prospective customers as our roadmap builders. And it has been much more successful that way. And I will, with a caveat, we are far from being successful. Like, we need 40 or 50 more customers before I could even take a paycheck.
Yeah.
But we're on that trajectory now. There's actually momentum and there's growth in that direction.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what's interesting is your pain point of transaction fees is really an interesting one. And I want to talk about how you came up with that. And again, like, my thought for this interview was a little bit different, but you're talking about things that I've really been thinking about a lot. And so I think it's kind of more fun to, like, just go back and forth on this a little bit. So with the transaction fee, well, I consistently have invoices through Stripe or platforms like that, where if it's $2, $3, $4 grand, $5 grand, that's paying way more. So once you get to a couple monthly clients who are paying that, very quickly that starts being really appealing, right? And so one thing I talk to clients about is, okay, kind of like we've said through this thing, worst thing you can do is try to market your solution. Nobody wants it. At the end of the day, yeah. They have pain in they have a problem that they want to solve, and they have a hierarchy of problem needs. And so just because somebody tells you they have a problem, that's not good enough either. So focusing on solution, really tough to market. Focusing on a problem, definitely getting better, but it has to be the right problem. And you have to frame that problem as solving pain. And if there's no pain, there's no motivation for the person to do that other than you cutting prices or creating some kind of artificial deal, right? But if you want people to crack their, what's something that's so painful that as soon as you mention that you have a solution for it, you start hearing the leather of somebody's wallet crack for them to throw money at you. And I would call that an intensely painful problem. It's something that keeps people up at night, or something that's like so painful that they're motivated to solve it, right? And as a small business owner, losing $70 off of a client every single month, month in and month out, for every client that I'm working with, it's not like crazy. I'm not going to say that's keeping me up at night, but it's painful enough to where if I can implement something and solve it, it becomes interesting, right? That is a painful problem, because it's just money that I'm losing for potentially no reason. So I'm really curious how you landed on that being the pain point that you would focus on in that first feature versus something else that might be more complicated.
It was twofold. On one hand, it was the most logical to build that feature first. It's sort of the heart and soul of what the product is, and what we saw in other products as a massive gap in value. And so it was almost required that we build that first. Secondly, that's just what people were interested in as we presented this solution to them. It can do this and that and this other thing, and they would just like hone in on this idea of, hold on, I pay you $100 to use this, but then I'm going to save $500 every month. Yeah. Oh, okay. So at the end of the year, I've got an extra $5,000 back in my pocket, even though I paid you guys $1,200 this year. You put another $5,000 back into my, like, it's
where it gets to be no brainer math, right? It's not, it could, it might, it's just immediate savings. So
right. And if you expect your business to grow, everyone expects their business to grow. So as you add more customers, your savings just get bigger. And so, yeah, it became this sort of virtuous cycle as we talked about that. And so that's just at, where we started building, was there specifically. Now we have, hey, can you integrate with this thing? Or can you do this very specific use case that I need, which is I bill people in this very specific way. Can you do that? So those are the kinds of things that we're starting to focus on now that we have the first piece taken care of. The contracts are done. That was our second piece. We had a lot of people waiting for contracts before they started, because they saw the value of getting rid of DocuSign and only having to pay for one subscription. So, clean that out. And now we're focused on integrations and adding new ways to invoice people and all these different things that will lead to more customers. This is what they're sort of waiting in the wings for these features to be announced. But it just made sense to start with the payments first.
Love it. I could spend a lot more time on this. So we can switch gears a little bit more to the go-to-market side. So when you're bootstrapping, I've seen a couple interesting posts from you, but how do you go to market? How are you going to market right now, and how are you making sure that you have the capital to keep acquiring customers?
Painfully. It's the only way to describe it. It's been a painful go-to-market process, but it has felt necessary, and I'm grateful for the position that we're in to be able to do that. There's two sides of it, the business finance, and then there's the personal finances. The business side, we're in a good spot right now where the business can pay for itself to survive. And that was priority number one. We got to get the business to a place where we don't have to put any more money into it. So we've reached that. We're a long ways away from it ever paying us. And so my co-founder, he's got a day job. And then I am just scraping. Like I'll go paint someone's house. And last year and a half ago, I was painting pickleball courts. I sort of self-taught how to do it. I had an opportunity for, someone offered, hey, can you come paint this pickleball court for me? So I studied on the University of YouTube and went out and did the job for him, and then
Love it.
started a business painting pickleball courts for a summer. This summer I am painting cinder block walls. But before that, just odd jobs. I still do freelance work from time to time, anything to keep food on the table and keep the lights on so that the business can keep growing without me having to take anything from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's classic bootstrapping, right? I love it. I did get one question here. I want to keep talking about go-to-market. For some reason, usually StreamYard pulls it in, but for some reason, it's not working. So somebody asked, how much input do you get from future customers while you're building out your product? And how much do you share with them while you're building it out?
We get a lot of input. So we are very much a sales-led organization. It's not product-led. The product is not selling itself. People don't sign themselves up. We sign them up and we onboard them manually. That's a big benefit to us in these early stages. Even though it's manual, we get to have a very hands-on approach. And so we get to hear everything that's working and everything that's not working. And we get to not just see, but we get to feel where those bottlenecks are. We also, during the sales process, when I'm on a discovery call with somebody, I get to hear from them specifically why they do or don't like the product or what we are missing and what they want us to build. And I'm able to get some of those at least verbal commitments of, yes, once you have this integration, call me because I'm ready to use it right away. And so that's the roadmap is very much created in those sales conversations.
That's huge. Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about that. But one thing I want to comment on with what you just said that I think is so key and that is so often overlooked is just getting feedback from the market. Like for whatever reason, I guess we all have pride and we think we know. And the more that you do something, more of an, quote unquote expert that you are, the easier it is to deceive yourself and not be open to hearing what the market actually wants. And the market can change from today to tomorrow. Like most of the time you can find some things that are true, but last year there were some major changes in the market, especially in the consulting space. And the year before, some of those things had started. And so, all of a sudden from one day to the next, you can have people be totally willing, they're in your pipeline, everything's good to go. And something shifts in the economy, something changes in the industry you're working in, and that can completely change. And if you don't have a path or a way to be consistently talking to the people you're selling to, the people you want to serve, where you're as a founder or as people on your leadership team having non-sales conversations, I think in some ways are even more valuable. But at the very least, having honest sales conversations where you're doing what you just said, like you're not just trying to push them into buying now. You're trying to understand, what are you looking for? Why are you going for this service to begin with? And if you're not ready to buy now, what are we missing that we could develop? And I think that is so important, especially as you're bootstrapping, to do that. And the value of bootstrapping is that it forces you, if you're going to be successful, to be much more efficient in what you're building. And so if you have a ton of money, it's easy to just throw money at whatever, build out a bunch of features that nobody wants, and then show the investors that, oh yeah, we're building all this stuff, right? Or we hired a bunch of salespeople and they're all out there doing activity. And so we need more money to keep that going because we're getting some customers, right? But if you're bootstrapping, you need to actually get real cash for real features that you've either built or that you're building, right? And if you don't do that, you don't have a business. And so in one sense, it's way harder. But then on the other side, you're actually building things that bring in revenue or you go under. And so you get a bunch, I think, better feedback loop that way. Yeah, I have another question, but I'm kind of curious if you have any.
Yeah, I've heard it described as bootstrapping 0 to 1 million is much harder than being funded. But 1 million to 10 million or beyond is much easier if you've been able to do that bootstrapped than if you do it the opposite approach of bringing in funding. And I think it's for that very reason. And I think that's the reason that you can't skip founder-led sales. That if you go hire a sales rep, which at some point you have to, you need to duplicate yourself and duplicate your efforts. But in those earliest stages, it has to be the founder doing the sales, because for this very reason, you get this tangible feedback. You learn what is working and what isn't. And honestly, nobody's going to sell it as well as the founder does anyways, right? That nobody else has that same burning passion for it because you've risked your livelihood for this.
Right.
So yeah, but
And nobody has
it's a
the
blessing and a
ability
curse.
to be able to, like, as a founder, you can go, hey, we'll make an exception here and we're going to build this extra piece for you to land this deal.
Yeah.
You can do that as a founder. Now, should you do that all the time? No, don't do that, please. But you can change
Yeah.
something about the product. You could change something about the terms. You can change something about whatever you want about the business, and at least to a degree. Whereas a salesperson can't do that. At the very least, they have to go, let me see what I could do. I'm going to go talk to my boss about it, right? But then you're losing that opportunity. Whereas, anytime you're building something, if you're able to go, okay, hold on a second, we got something here. Clearly there's a need. What can we do in the interim? Like, I want to make this work. How can I make this work for you? And then you could work that out. Maybe they go, look, I'd love to do this, but I've only got $50 a month right now, and I could do that now. Cool. I'm going to give you your first 6 months for $50. You just made a sale. And you could do that as a founder. Whereas if you're not the founder trying to sell, and I've been in that position where you're not the founder and you're trying to sell, and you're running into these product marketing issues, really, that something needs to change about the way you're delivering and the way you're communicating, and you can't. So totally agree with you on that. So then, as far as how you're actually getting these conversations, so you mentioned, that this is sales led, it's not product led. So you need to be actually getting in front of these people, having real conversations. How are you doing that?
LinkedIn. Yeah, it's just me posting stuff and DMing people. So I stay quite active on LinkedIn. I make a lot of posts, and they're not always related to Mallow. It's just feeding that sweet algorithm what it wants. And then, when I do make a post about Mallow, I try to make it valuable, and not just like, hey, here's a thing I'm selling, hope you buy it, but actually providing real value via storytelling. Here's how one customer is saving $300 every month by using Mallow. Or providing paradigm shifting thoughts where it's like, hey, most people don't realize that Stripe or their competitors are not the only option, and you don't have to forfeit 3% of your revenue. I know that that's sort of a novel concept because that's what everyone is taking from you, but you don't actually have to. You're trying to share ideas like that. So organic content, and then I'll just DM people. Hey, here's a thing we're building. I would love to get your feedback on it. And if they agree to give me feedback on it, I go into those calls looking for feedback. They're really not a sales call in those scenarios. I don't try to push for a sale. I tell them up front, here's what I'm looking to do. Here's what we're building. I want feedback from you because you fit our ICP. If you want this to be a sales call at the end, great, we can shift gears and do that. But really, I am looking to share this with you, and I want your feedback on whether or not this is valuable. And I do those calls they're short, they're 15 minutes long. I give them a rundown of what Mallow is. And if they like it, cool. Then we transition into a sales conversation. If it's not for them, it's a great opportunity for me to get feedback on why. What is it that we're missing? If we were to build this thing that you would need, then would you be interested maybe? And half the time they say yes. So it's building up pipeline. Sometimes it leads to a sale, but most of the time it's just getting really good feedback.
Yeah, I think that's such a key approach, because it's really something that I've been doing myself and been starting to teach people how to do, is exactly that. Like, if you approach every conversation that you're having, even if somebody's a perfect fit, instead of being like, okay, now let me tell you about, the classic networking thing would be like, you go to the networking event and then you're just constant, and I've been there, right, where you're just like, every conversation you're looking how you can like maneuver that into talking about what you're doing. And to a degree, like whatever you're selling, you got to be willing to do that. But how do you do that in a way that actually serves the other person? And looking for ways to add value to them. And then, like you said, it's kind of interesting because when your pitch is, hey, I would love your feedback, that puts them in the position of being somebody who has a valuable opinion, and people love sharing their opinion, right? So
Yes.
now all of a sudden, instead of it being reaching out to go, hey, do you want to jump on this demo? Like, good luck with that. That is, I get pitched with that all the time. Like, I'm in your ICP, right? And if you reached
Everyone
out to
loves
me,
getting on demo calls, right?
yeah, and you're like, hey, we got this great solution. We could save you 3% on your transaction fees. Even if you said that, it is a pain point that I have, but I would just be like, whatever, next, no trust there at all. But if you reached out, especially if we have mutual connections or I've seen a post of yours or whatever, I comment on your post and then you reach out and you go, hey, I'd love your feedback on something I'm building. Way higher likelihood I'm going to jump on a call like that, right? And then
Yeah.
as long as you don't break my trust by just pitching me, but you're genuinely looking for feedback, by the time we're done with that call, for me personally, with your particular solution, there's a really good likelihood I'm going to be interested in doing that because I actually do have that problem, and you are actually building something to solve it, right? And so I love that approach because I think it maybe a good way to say it is when you approach building your company with humility, where you recognize like I actually really don't know what the market needs, and I'm genuinely trying to find that so that I can create the right solution for the people I'm trying to serve. I think the funny thing is you actually end up getting way more market interest or realize really quickly that you're on the wrong track. Whereas if you go in and you're like, no, this is the right solution, I just need to push it into the market as hard as I can. I know that that's kind of how founders usually talk, and the ones who get funded, maybe that helps you get funding easier when you've got
Right.
this like bravado and like
Yeah.
over courage or whatever. But most of those startups fail. So it's like, well, do you want to start something that you bootstrap and you have humility and it actually ends up turning into something, or you don't waste a lot of your time, or going after something for years that never ends up actually making you any money anyway.
Yeah, and the odds of making life-changing money are much higher when you're bootstrapped. The total quantity of money that everyone is making is lower, right? You might not sell the business for 40 billion dollars, but that's okay. If you sell it for 40 million and you own 50%, you just made 20 million bucks. That is life-changing money, right? So it's
Yeah.
when you're bootstrapped, you can actually the likelihood of making life-changing money is much higher. I will say though, every decision cannot be democratized among prospects. You do have to have conviction to begin with, and you have to choose a direction.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a good point.
there's that, I don't know how that quote goes, but there's that quote by Steve Jobs of like, if you ask people what they want, then you're going to build something that sucks. You sort of have to tell them what they want.
Yeah. If Henry Ford asked people what they'd want, they would have said a faster horse or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. That one's it. Yeah. And that is true to an extent. We had to make a bold move. We had to make a decision with conviction of people will want to pay for a product that saves them money when it comes to payments, right? They will be willing to pay us in exchange for saving on every transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And they will end up saving more total cumulatively every month than they end up paying us. And therefore there's value. That was a decision we had to make with conviction to begin. From there, it's all the little things. It would be helpful if there was a button that did this, or it would be helpful if your system connected with my other system via API,
Right.
or all of those little things. They should be outsourced. You should be getting feedback to do that stuff. You shouldn't just
And there needs
hold
to
the
be a good
product.
chunk of
And
client. Like, I want to make like a comparison to what you're saying, that because my wife and I run an organization in Kenya, and something that's become like really apparent is that if you bring a donor to another country, yes, you want their feedback, but you cannot be donor led in what you're doing, because donors have good ideas and you need to have their resources to be able to do what you're doing, but you can't let donors tell you what you're going to do on the ground. You can get their input, then you can take it under advisement, but as soon as you start saying, cool, yeah, we'll do that, you're going to build a Frankenstein of a mission that's not actually going to solve basically any of what you're actually trying to solve at the end of the day. And most of the time is going to create problems. And I used to work for this company that had a poster of the 5,000 features of their software product, which is like the opposite of what you would ever want to do. And it was hell to try to market this product. And we basically took it and simplified it down to where we basically didn't talk about all but like 3 of those features, because
Yeah.
they had done that, right? They had gone to they had, anytime anybody would ask for anything, they're like, yeah, we could build that. And they'd build the whole thing out. And then one client uses it. And then now they have to support it. They have to update it. So then they don't update nearly as often. They were taking forever to move to a cloud solution because they got all this legacy stuff that people use that they have to support and trying to get that over. And maybe only one client ever used that to begin with. And so, yeah, hugely important. But I
That's
think it's
hilarious
like,
that they had a 5,000 feature product and that it was um, they weren't ashamed of it. They were very proud of it. It's so much so that they turned it into a poster.
yeah, I mean, they're a German-based company, so it's kind of the German engineering. Like, maybe some of that's also like a cultural difference too, because they seem to be able to sell it where they were. But again, like the founder selling it, well, sure, he could sell it because he's got the relationships, he's got the cloud, and he could change anything at any time, any price, anything without help. Whereas you go to another country, totally different market, different group of people, different features needed, and then they're totally unwilling to develop that because they're like, well, we can sell this here with, well, the way we're doing it or whatever. And it's just like not listening to that market feedback at all. Kind of getting back to what we were saying there. So I think that's a great point. I think maybe one way to frame it too is what you want to be listening for isn't what people are telling you that they want, but where is the pain that they're experiencing, and how can your product solve the pain that they have? Because what I found is a lot of times people have pain in their life around something that's going on, and they think that it's coming from the wrong problem. And so then part of your job is to figure out what is the pain and how can we reframe the pain to the right problem that's actually going to solve the issue and get them where they want to go. And that's, I think, kind of getting at the heart of it. Well, if we go back to the Henry Ford example, the pain is like having to have stables and horses, and the pain is that it's only available to the ultra wealthy. The pain, there's all of these issues. You can only go through certain weather. You can cap out at a certain speed. So those are all pain points, right? And so then if he asks, what problem do you have? Oh, we need faster horses, right? But he was listening for something deeper than that, and then creates a solution to solve the actual problem that alleviates the pain, not what somebody says their problem is. So I think that's kind of an interesting way to think about it, but very hard to achieve. So
it's so much easier said than done too. Like it sounds great and it sounds like, yes, that's what I want to do. I want to create something that solves their underlying problem. But most people don't tell you what their underlying problem is, even if they could recognize it. Most people don't recognize what the underlying problem is.
Yeah, and that's what makes a great product. That's what makes great product marketing, is discovering that. And the only way you're going to do that is by talking to more people. Okay, so we went kind of in the weeds there a little bit, but super interesting. Just love it if you could leave us with what would be practical advice for somebody who's looking to bootstrap. Maybe they're already in it, and they are getting closer to where you were with Whelm, or they're just looking to get started. What advice would you give them?
Oh man. Okay. If they're looking to get started, don't. That's my advice to anybody who thinks they want to be an entrepreneur. No, you don't. You like the idea of being an entrepreneur, and it's probably not worth the pain. There are some people who are going to ignore that and continue trying to become entrepreneurs anyways. Those people were meant for it. Don't, if they're undeterred by my suggestion, then great, they're going to be an entrepreneur anyway. But if you are slightly deterred by it, then maybe it's not for you. It is the hardest path you can choose. It's the most painful path you can choose. The promise of upside is extremely low, and it will put a strain on every other facet of your life. So good luck. I suggest not doing it. For those of us who are sick in the head and have to do it anyways, then my advice is to start in whatever realm you have some bit of expertise or authority. For us, it was payments because we had built Whelm. There was nothing else. I don't come from a background in finance or payments. Neither does my co-founder. But it was tangentially related to what we had already built. And we had people, excuse me, we had people asking for it. And so we took whatever little bit of authority and knowledge we had there and just doubled down on it. Now I would say I'm fairly authoritative and fairly knowledgeable about the payments industry, which I wasn't before, but now I am because of building this company.
Yeah.
So start with where you're at. If you happen to have a lot of knowledge about a certain subject or a lot of passion about a certain subject, pick that, and then try to have as many conversations as possible. Don't try to go build a solution that's looking for a problem. Go dig deep and look for a problem that you reasonably believe you can build a solution for. If you are like me and you're not a technical founder, so I'm not a developer, I didn't build the product, you're going to have to find a way to build the product first in order to present it to the market or sell it. If you can do it through services first, that's the best route to take. In our situation, we can't like process someone's payments for them, right? There's nothing we can do there. So you're going to have to find a technical co-founder to help you do that. I have thoughts on the best way to do it or on a way to do it, but all of them require you put in some money. So unless you've got a really good friend who's a developer, good luck.
Yeah, and I think something that you just said that's super interesting is, first of all, if you like hitting your fingers with hammers, then maybe be an entrepreneur. If you don't, if you don't like that, maybe banging yourself in the head with a hammer is more like it. And if you get a headache, then maybe it's not for you. But if somehow you hit yourself in the head with a hammer and nothing happens, you're broken enough to.
It doesn't feel like a little baby's hammer. It feels like a sledgehammer most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that, and then having as many conversations early on as possible, I think is hugely important. I think everything you just said makes a ton of sense, where if you can start in services, totally agree. Like if there's a way that you can deliver what you're doing manually, even if you make $5 an hour doing it, do that first. Because if you can't get somebody to pay for it and deliver it manually, like if you're trying to create an AI solution for something, tell people that you're creating an AI solution and then let them know, hey, first we're going to do this manually. So I'm going to hook you up and I'm going to be doing all of this myself and you're going to get me doing it. And then we're going to develop after that, and so then you're selling that and you're delivering it and you're getting income coming into your business. Because the biggest thing is just runway, right? If you run out of runway, you're done. Yep. And then I think tagging on what advice I would give based on what you said is, if you have a day job, don't quit it until you're making money in your business.
Yes.
And you're not going to magically have cash appear. And especially if you have a software product like what you're talking about, if you're selling a service where, you can sell it for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 grand, then at least you can actually make that money. But if you're selling something that's $100 or $200 a month and you think you're going to just go out and everybody's going to want it, they're not. It's going to take you way longer than you think to get to market with what you're doing. So don't quit your day job.
If you think it'll take you X amount of time, quadruple it. And that still might not be enough time.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Really appreciate you jumping on and joining me. And yeah, last thing, how can people find out about Mallow?
Find us online, getmallow.com. Mallow is Mallow. Getmallow.com. Or find me on LinkedIn, Chipper Whatcott. I'm the only one with that weird name. So should be easy to find me.
Awesome. Thanks, Chipper. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Joseph.